Another edition of Outside Shots presented by TheLines.com. You can follow me at Eli Herskovich. You can follow The Lines at The Lines US. I'll get to my guest here in just a moment, but before we get started, remember you can bet $5 with BetMGM and get $150 in bonus bets with your first bet, win or lose with that $5 minimum. Bet The Lines promo code, one word, The Lines, to get those $150 in bonus bets. Terms and conditions apply. For more details, head over to TheLines.com. Remember that bonus bets are not equivalent to real money. If you're watching or listening to us in the Tar Heel state of North Carolina, sorry, UNC fans, but you can still bet on the tournament and get great sports betting promos now that sports betting is legal in North Carolina as of a couple weeks ago, and find the best promo codes over at TheLines.com. You can check out all of our bets in real time in our Discord channel. The link is over at TheLines.com at the top right-hand corner. It is free. And without further ado, my guest today on Outside Shots, previewing the two Saturday Elite Eight games, he is Mike Rutherford at Card Chronicle, manager of CardChronicle.com, host of the Mike Rutherford Show, and author of 100 Things Louisville Fans Should Know and Do. Mike, first and foremost, did you include any edits, like re-edits in your book about the Kenny Payne era?
No, man. It was, the book's a few years old now. The funniest thing that happened, timing has been a thing throughout my professional career, and it's usually been bad. My book was published with a foreword written by Rick Pitino the day after Rick Pitino was officially fired at Louisville. So that was one of the greatest things. So yeah, we're probably due for like a little bit of a refresh. I think in the foreword that he wrote, he talks about how he and Tom Jurich, the athletic director at the time, were such a great team and how they probably were going to go out together and all this stuff. And it was fortuitous. They definitely went out together, but just not at the time that he was talking about. So yeah, we're probably due for like a reboot of that book, I think.
And we'll maybe touch on the new coach, Kelsey, and the whole Richard Pitino saga, even Rick Pitino's son potentially being in the rumor mill to be the Louisville coach, maybe on the back end of the show. But I've known Mike for quite a while. He actually helped me get my start writing nationally about college basketball about 7 or 8 years ago. So it's kind of crazy, man, how life goes full circle.
For sure. Yeah, it's been a fun ride. I love watching you grow into a bunch of different things, and it's been fun following you the last couple of years doing this stuff for the Lines and getting really into gambling, which is something that we now have legal in Kentucky, and people are starting to emphasize and embrace way more down here where I live.
Yeah, if you're a Kentucky fan and listening to this because you follow Mike, my apologies again, along with what happened to UNC last night. Kentucky and UNC fans both have my condolences. But looking ahead and looking backward at the same time as we kind of recap the Sweet 16 games on Thursday night, recording here on March 29th. Underdogs go 3-1 straight up after favorites went 15-1 outright in the round of 32. UConn, an 11.5 point favorite, closing right around that number, was the lone favorite to cash, winning by 30 points in their rematch against San Diego State up in Boston. Clemson, plus 250 on the money line, cashes against Arizona. Alabama, plus 185 cashes against the aforementioned Tar Heels. And then Illinois, a slight dog, plus 105 on the money line, hits against Iowa State. Terrence Shannon Jr., just a truck in transition in that game and throughout the tournament and in March in general in the Big Ten tournament. So the top two seeds now in the West region with UNC and Arizona are out with those Clemson and Alabama wins. By the way, going back to UConn really quickly before I throw it to you, Mike, UConn has won 13 straight tournament games, winning all of them by 13 plus points or more. Dan Hurley had a funny quote last night saying, "We're not getting close games, so we might as well blow the opposition out." What were your takeaways from last night's action?
I think the UConn quote right there is sort of interesting because you do wonder what's going to happen if they do get a close game, which I'm not sure happens on Saturday. I think they're a decent matchup for Illinois, but the Final Four, maybe that national title game, Purdue looks pretty stout on the other side of the bracket. I think Houston can look really stout, but I love that quote. UConn looks like an absolute wrecking ball right now. They feel like they're inevitable. This has been the thing the entire season, right? Like they've looked. I know some people have said it's UConn and Purdue, it's UConn, Purdue, and Houston and everybody else. It's kind of, to me, it's felt like it's UConn and everybody else this entire season. They've been that good. They absolutely destroyed San Diego State from start to finish last night. I thought going into the game it was going to look like last year's national title game. I was like, I think they'll win by 15 to 20. It'll be that same kind of game. They probably could have won by 40 yesterday. They played a C- game in the first half, and they led by 9 at half. And I was like, this is, it's done. Like, I love Brian Dutcher. I love this SDSU team, but they've got no shot if they couldn't at least be leading UConn at the half the way that they were playing. That was the snooze game of last night. I think if you want to talk about big takeaways, let's talk about the only real, I was going to say it feels like the most shocking result of yesterday. Alabama over UNC was obviously an upset. Illinois was technically an upset, but Clemson advancing to an Elite Eight against Alabama. I made the joke about, two former college football powerhouses now squaring off in the Elite Eight. Some Bama fans who don't take jokes well, we're not excited about it, but Clemson, Brad Brownell is a guy who has been, he's a cockroach in a nuclear war, right? Everyone thinks he's going to get fired every single year, and he just does just enough to get the job, and then has one or two of these runs every 4 or 5 years to justify his existence when the team maybe doesn't live up to expectations a couple of years later. This is a team that going into the season, a lot of people liked because of their experience. They brought back PJ Hall, which was a huge deal. They brought back, the Hunter brothers have a lot of college experience. There's a lot of talent there. And then the season starts, and they're okay. The metrics like them. Some of the results don't really follow that. But the way they end the season is really, really terrifying. They lose 3 of their last 4 games. All 3 losses are to teams that don't really sniff the NCAA tournament. They're blown out by Boston College in the ACC tournament. They are everybody's trendiest upset pick in the first round. Like, nobody had them beating New Mexico. They were underdogs against New Mexico in a 6-11 game. I thought New Mexico was going to win handily, and they go out there and out of nowhere beat them by 21. And look, outside of the last few minutes of that Baylor game in the second round, Clemson has looked super solid, like rock solid. They've been stout. Brad Brownell calling up big time baseline out of bounds plays at key moments. I thought he had a great game plan yesterday where he's like, we're gonna play a couple steps back. We're gonna pack it in a little bit. If Arizona wants to try to bomb away against us from the outside, we're going to take our chances. And Caleb Love's like, let's go. 80 shots up, even though I'm 0 for 62. And that it wound up being it was the only way they could win that game, and it's the way that they wound up winning that game. I think there's a lot to like about Clemson right now, and I think they're a live shot to beat Alabama in the same type of game in about 24 hours.
Yeah, we'll preview Clemson, Alabama after we do UConn, Illinois, but just kind of bouncing off of your takeaways with Clemson. PJ Hall, man, off ball was incredible. Some of those slips, but also Pele Larson allowed that to happen. Yeah. He got destroyed defensively. Brad Brownell, by the way, your quote, or your should-be quote, and the liner that you should trademark, cockroach in a nuclear war. If you don't trademark that, I'm definitely going to. Brownell was incredible down the stretch with especially the timeout on the baseline out of bounds, the slip by PJ Hall to get to the rim on that dunk. And Hall didn't really have much going for him. He got in foul trouble in the second half after a so-so first half, and that kind of got him going and got him cooking down the stretch, which is exactly what Clemson needed after kind of stalling on a few possessions. But going to the Alabama and UNC game next, Armando Bacot and RJ Davis combining 6 of 21 from the field in the second half. So you mentioned Caleb Love. Love and Davis combined 0 of 18 from deep. First time any 2 players shot 0 for 9 from 3 in the same day in NCAA tournament history. And we know the storyline behind those 2. You know it quite well, being an ACC guy. And then last but not least, Jalen Withers, one of your former players, or at least a player that played for Louisville that you cover, had a huge layup, a play that he made off the dribble down the stretch that I think either made it a 1-point game or gave UNC the lead. And then he takes a terrible shot in the final, minute of the game, leading to an Alabama bucket. Alabama winds up winning the game. Grant Nelson was a stud. We'll get to him in a second. Jalen Withers, man, what are you doing, right?
It's the Jalen Withers experience in a nutshell. And look, I don't want to bag on the kid. He was up and down, but clearly he's a super, super talented player. And you saw that. Confidence was a huge issue for him at Louisville. And he has that just like no hesitation, fully confident drive to the basket to make it a 1-point game on their most important possession of the season to that point. And I'm like, damn, like, way to go, Jalen. Was not expect. He's even more of a role player at UNC than he was at Louisville. So you're you're not even expecting him to be on the floor in that situation, let alone to be the guy who takes the ball and just goes right to the basket. And then maybe got to his head a little bit too much because he takes the no hesitation 3 in the final minute when they've got the lead, and you're like, what are you doing? And then he's late on the rotation on the other end, and fouls. I think it was Nelson who had the and one. Which basically put the game, it was technically still within reach, but it felt like put Arizona or Alabama, I should say, in the driver's seat. It was a rough stretch for Jalen, but that's kind of the Jalen experience in a nutshell. Just some highs and then some super lows. The Caleb Love, RJ Davis thing is wild. I mean, like you said, everyone knows the background. Everyone knows, that group leads them to the national title game a couple of years ago. There's a little bit of friction there. They don't really like sharing the spotlight. The next season goes terribly. Caleb Love transfers. They both have things to say. And then, of course, it's this, they're going to meet in the Elite Eight and they're going to shoot it out. And then the meeting doesn't happen quite literally because both of them have a historically bad night on the same night in the same building. It's just, March gives us this stuff every single year where you're like, you can't write this. You could not have foreseen this. But how about Alabama? I mean, you talk about roller coaster rides. Bama coming into this tournament, I think everybody was like, how much can we really trust them? At their best, sure, they're going to beat somebody 110-85, but at their worst, there's no way we can trust this team. They don't defend. The record, the metrics love them. The record says another thing. They scream first or second round upset. That's what everybody said. And they've been pretty solid through 3 rounds. Now, maybe that weirdo game is coming in the Elite Eight, but last night, like, they did everything necessary. They had ample opportunity to fold. They had leads. They were back and forth. UNC makes the big run to pull away by 5, and it looks like, hey, this is over. They bounce right back. Guys are hitting big shots. Sears plays out of his mind. And defensively, they really turned it up when they had to. I thought that was super impressive. They didn't get dominated inside by a more physically imposing team. It was a really, really impressive performance by Alabama. It was easy to see how that was going to be the game of the night because of the tempo and because of the offense that both teams play. But the fact that Bama was able to step up more than UNC at key moments, I thought really surprised me. I mean, this is a team that we thought was going to play for a national title a year ago when they were the number 1 overall seeds, and they gave that clunker performance in the Sweet 16 against SDSU that we've sort of been waiting to see for them this tournament, and it hasn't happened. Maybe, some teams are just a year late, and would not be shocked at all if this is the team that gets Nate Oates. I don't want to say over the hump because he hasn't been doing this that long, but into the Final Four for the first time and just a couple of games away from playing for a national title. They've been really impressive through the first 3 rounds of this tournament.
Yeah, and just highlighting Nelson before we get on to UConn and Illinois. First player in NCAA tournament history with at least 20 points, 10 boards, 5 blocks, and 2 threes. He had 24 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 blocks, including that game-sealing one after missing the 2 free throws. Probably UNC wasn't going to hit a 3-quarter court heave, but he blocked Ingram's shot, and that sealed the game at the end. Mark Sears, too. You kind of mentioned that Alabama was seesawing a bit in the wrong direction, and it kind of felt like the game could have gotten out of hand at a couple different points, especially when I think UNC got 3 or 4 chances on that one possession when Baycott had about 2 or 3 offensive rebounds on a single possession, mind you. But Sears kind of started to take the game on by himself. Like he went at Baycott or one of UNC's bigs one-on-one in transition. And then Grant Nelson happened, right?
Yeah, I mean, Alabama's not a team that we talk about when we talk about teams that are super reliant on the transfer portal. But when you look at the guys that really stepped up last night, I mean, Grant Nelson, North Dakota State, big guy in the portal last year. There's always question marks about how these guys are going to translate to the power conference level. He's been fantastic. I mean, Aaron Estrada's from Hofstra. He was really, really good last night as well. So Nate Oates has done, he's not Eric Musselman where it's just total flip of a roster every single year, but he's done a really good job at bringing in guys who fit his system, who can play up tempo, who are offensive minded, but have the skills to play good enough defense. And it's worked. And maybe it didn't work as seamlessly as we thought it might this year. And they lost a bunch of games, but right now in the tournament, you're seeing the fruits of his labor pay off. And those are guys that, like, you can see them working in a system like Alabama's, and maybe it took a little bit longer for them to mesh than Oates and company would have liked, but here they are. And Grant Nelson, I mean, game of his life last night. A guy that I think probably a lot of the country not overly familiar with, one of those guys that can step up and be more of a March superstar, more of a March standout, and he sees the spotlight last night. He was great. They don't, like they're still not a very deep team, which could be an issue. That Clemson's going to try to bang them around a little bit. I think they're going to try to get really physical with them and get guys like Nick Pringle and maybe Nelson into foul trouble. But it doesn't matter. I mean, they've had guys step up that haven't done a ton this year, and when they've had their number called, they've been fantastic in this tournament. Sammy Walters, he's good for a moment or two, it seems like, every single game. Just super impressed by the way that Bama was able to handle things last night every single time that it seemed like North Carolina was going to land a knockout punch.
100%. And you mentioned Pringle. He's dealing with an injury, right? So we don't know if he's coming back. Arguably, Alabama, at least statistically, their best three-point shooter when I'm talking about Wrightsell and Pringle brings them a lot. When you consider the fact that they're going up against two pretty dominant post-up presences, especially PJ Hall. But we'll touch on Alabama and Clemson in a little bit. First up, in the East region, number one seeded and the number one overall seed in the tournament, UConn, an 8.5-point favorite as we record this on Friday afternoon against the third seeded Fighting Illini. Total of 155. Total has dipped down a bit. And I saw the initial opener for this game was UConn minus 7.5. And that was like a soft opener at DraftKings. And then the line kind of shot up and surfaced 8.5 pretty much everywhere else. And one bookmaker I saw being quoted saying it's pretty much one-way traffic on UConn. That's what they expect, and that's why they kind of inflated the number to an extent. I'm not saying ballooned it, and the number should be 4, but still, I think you can make the case that it's a bit inflated, and I'll touch on my reasoning here in a bit. But kind of looking at the pace, I think, Mike, both games are going to be a battle of tempo. UConn wants to play at a slower pace, even though they're elite in transition in their own right offensively. Illinois, the exact opposite. They don't want to generate turnovers and speed you up defensively, but they do want to push the pace when they have the possessions. And Terrence Shannon did make some big defensive plays in his own right yesterday. And the Huskies, by the way, rank in the 56th percentile of percentage of points allowed in transition in Big East play. So transition defense maybe can be had. Haslametrics, our partner, makes this game UConn minus 5.5-ish. So, kind of off in terms of what the number is in the betting market. I make this closer to UConn minus 6, minus 6.5. Mike, what do you make of this game?
I think when you talk about the transition defense, a lot of that is a direct result of how much they want to crash the offensive glass. UConn, one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country. I wonder if they kind of tweak that just a little bit because Terrence Shannon is so good in transition and gets so many of his points, going downhill and getting off on the break, off of missed shots. I do wonder if Danny Hurley says, all right, we don't need to crash 5. Maybe we just crash 3 because we've got a little bit more size than them inside. We can still take advantage and get those second chance opportunities while also taking an extra step to be aware of Terrence Shannon in transition and not letting them get points that way. Because I think Hurley believes, and probably rightly so, if they can make this a half-court game, they're going to win, and they're going to win handily. They're the better half-court team. There's no question about it. They can get out and run if they want to, but in this game, I feel like if they can get Illinois into their sets and trying to have to run that half-court offense, they're probably going to win this game. These are the top 2 offensive teams in the country in terms of efficiency. I think Illinois was number 1 going into last night. UConn passed them because of how good they were against SDSU. So, different styles, but still very, very good at what they do. I think that Illinois has got a little bit of, Coleman Hawkins is going to have to step up, and he's been a little bit erratic at times. Marcus Domask has been fantastic in this tournament, had the triple-double in the first round. He's going to have to be at his best. They're going to have to try to exploit UConn inside, which is not an easy thing to do. I mean, you look at UConn and you look for sort of holes, and there aren't that many. They're just rock solid every single level, and I think Illinois will probably try to make it a game where they get a ton of points in transition, and when they are in the half court, they will try to exploit UConn in the paint a little bit. And I don't know if that's going to work. I just think like every time I talk about a Connecticut game, it always goes back to the same point, which I think UConn is just too good. Like I can't pick against them. They may get beat this tournament. I'll have to see it to believe it, just because I've watched them a ton this year, and there's way more to like than there is to nitpick. And I think that the same holds true for this game.
And when Illinois does want to get in transition, Terrence Shannon has been incredible last night, even on the defensive end, a couple big steals down the stretch, like I mentioned, against Iowa State. He scored 246 points in March, the most of any player in March since Kemba Walker and Jimmer Fredette. So yeah, it's comparable. Like, we've been waiting for a comparable star to at least Kemba. And we may have gotten one in Shannon, even though maybe he's not as good of a pure shooter as either of those guys. Kind of highlighting this for a second before I give my points on UConn, Illinois. Shannon's growth as a playmaker and just as a pure scorer, he didn't take games over like this, A, at Texas Tech for sure, and B, last year he kind of was hesitant down the stretch of games, and it didn't have definitely this killer instinct that we're seeing, let alone the ability to finish like he does in the open floor.
No, I mean, he was sensational in the Big Ten tournament, and you kind of were like, okay, that's one thing, cool. But the NCAA tournament, 26 points or more in all 3 games. He's shooting the ball well from the outside, which opens up a lot of different things for him. 4 of 10 from 3 last night. He was 2 of 5 against Duquesne. 3 of 9 against Morehead State, but a lot of those were taken when they'd kind of pulled away. And he shot the ball 50% or better from 3 in 2 of their 3 games in the Big Ten tournament. So I think that's a huge thing for him. When you can't just back off him, if you have to press up on him, he's going to go right around you. And he's big enough, and he's physical enough, and he's athletic enough to finish from just about every spot on the floor. He's a 3-level scorer. But you're right. Like, he's this is the first time where we've seen him really develop that killer instinct where he wants to crush you. If he makes a couple of shots in a row, he wants the ball every single possession. It's something that we have not seen from Shannon throughout his career. He's become more of a consistent talent. He's always had the skill. Like, he's always been a guy that you look at and you're like, damn, if he could just put it all together, he could be one of the best players in the entire country. He could be an elite pro prospect. The skill set has always been there. But just for whatever reason, you see this every now and then where a guy just hits his stride at this point in his college career and it doesn't turn off. And it seems like Shannon, I fully expect him to play well against Connecticut. I think UConn will devote more attention to him than some teams have, and they have more tools to slow him down a little bit. And I think that if Illinois gets beat in this game, it's not going to be because he just has a 4 for 18 clunker. I expect him to play really well in this game because he's been rock solid for the last 5-6 weeks, really the whole season.
And that's the question mark for me off the bat is, like you alluded to, if UConn keeps this game in the half court, they probably cover the number more often than not if the possessions are in the half court at both ends of the floor. Stephon Castle against Terrence Shannon Jr. We've seen Castle shut down the opponent's best player. Boo Booey, I'm not considering him to be like a Terrence level-esque player, but Castle did shut him down in the round of 32, did a great job on some of San Diego State's shooters last night, including Lamont Butler in the half court. So I don't think anybody is stopping Shannon when he gets in the open floor, especially with an odd man break. But if this game is played more so in the half court, Castle has proven more often than not that he can shadow a player like Terrence Shannon Jr. and maybe hold them to 5 of 15, 4 of 12, something like that from the field. By the way, if Illinois does start coughing the ball up, that's a little bit of a question mark with San Diego State. Only 12 turnovers, but UConn capitalizing with 20 points off of turnovers in the Sweet 16. So selectively pushing the pace in transition and also finishing in the half court off of those turnovers. The one area where I think Illinois can give UConn problems, among some smaller ones, but the biggest one is if Coleman Hawkins can pull Donovan Clingan out of the paint and Illinois starts hitting some of those mid-range shots with UConn being in drop coverage. Like, I was looking at the efficiency numbers for Illinois in the mid-range. UConn A, running you off the three-point line. They're allowing a bottom 50 opponent's three-point attempt rate And then you look at mid-range efficiency and mid-range attempt rate, opponents rank in the 18th percentile in that regard and 17th percentile when it comes to mid-range efficiency. Damask, who you brought up, to me is going to be the key to exploiting UConn's drop coverage. 74th percentile in mid-range efficiency. Shannon just above average. Hawkins, I think 47th percentile, so just below average. And then everybody else on Illinois, considering they don't really have a true point guard, is well below average. So would you agree that even though Shannon is kind of getting the limelight here in the spotlight, that it's Damask, he's going to have the big game, especially against Klingon's drop coverage, in order for Illinois to keep this one close?
100%. I mean, I think they're also going to have to rely on Dane Danger coming off the bench and playing big-time minutes again. He's a big, physical, imposing presence who can help you out in this game against a team that has a ton of big, physical, imposing presences. But Hawkins is the guy, and it's like, this is one of those scenarios where you lay out, if Hawkins can do this, then Klingon has to do this and all this stuff. And you just hope that Hawkins doesn't come out there and get 2 quick whistles, because that could absolutely happen. Or Klingon could go out there and get 2 quick whistles. But it does seem like that's the one area that you look at and you try to say, outside of, getting cheap points in transition, because UConn, like you mentioned, is not a great transition defense team. Outside of that, if you do get in the half court, I think you've got to pull Klingon away, and you've got to use that super skill and athleticism that you have with guys that maybe are a little bit smaller but a little bit quicker than UConn's front court players. I like Stephon Castle. I like what you say. He's a guy who's really emerged as a potential lottery pick as this season has gone on, really come into his own. And a lot of times you see the potential, like watching Colorado play in this tournament with Cody Williams, but he's like the 3rd or 4th best player on Colorado, and it's more about potential with the draft stock. With Castle, he's become a really good college basketball player as this season has gone on. Like, he's doing things that fit the college game while also showcasing his next level skill set. And he is one of those guys that you look at and you're like, he's got the skills and the athleticism and the size a little bit to match up fairly well with Terrence Shannon and keep him from going off. Again, if they can keep them into those half-court situations. But yeah, if I'm Illinois, I'm pulling Klingon away. I'm trying to get ISO sets with Shannon where maybe there's not that rim protector there. But Hawkins is going to have to make Klingon respect the jump shot and respect the second level of that 3-part game if they're going to make that happen. And he's inconsistent when it comes to stuff like that throughout his career.
Hit a big 3 in the second half, a couple of them for that matter, but right. And he can get hot-headed, so hopefully for anybody looking to bet Illinois, he doesn't get teed up. But looking at UConn offensively at the other end of the court, top 135 in three-point scoring rate. Illinois runs you off the three-point line. I think they're allowing a bottom 20, bottom 30 three-point attempt rate in college basketball. Now, UConn can hit those mid-range shots, and I'm not saying this is an exact comparison in terms of the final outcome of the game. Illinois is, even if they win the game, even if they cover, this isn't going to be an Illinois by double-digit kind of final margin of victory. But I go back to the Creighton-UConn game when those two teams matched up in Omaha the second time around, and McDermott adjusted by kind of bowling through those ball screens and not allowing UConn to shoot threes, so running them off the three-point line in that game as well. And that allowed Creighton to get out in transition when they got those UConn misses in the mid-range. Now, we've seen Cam Spencer exploit drop coverage in his own right this year, but Illinois' defense doesn't match up terribly if they can hard hedge and get some of those misses in the mid-range and then leak out.
It doesn't. They've not been a great defensive team. I think they're they're on the lower end of the great offense, okay defense spectrum for these teams that are remaining, depending on which efficiency metrics you're looking at. But they could be better. Like when you look at the tools that they have at their disposal, like there's no real reason for them to be, around the 100s or just inside the 100s in adjusted defensive efficiency. They've got the size, the skills, the athleticism to be much, much better on that end of the floor. And you're right, like they will run UConn off that three-point line. I'm not sure that's going to matter. I think UConn can adjust well to that. Like guys like Cam Spencer seems to make the right decisions in those situations whenever he's playing. He's matured in that regard. He's not mature in every regard, but he's matured in that regard for sure. And I think you can say the same thing about Alex Karabin and certainly Tristan Newton, who always seems to make the right play at the right time. after, this time a year ago being kind of the question mark of this team, which seems hilarious in hindsight because he always makes the right play. Castle has grown as the season has gone on. He's another guy who I think can hurt you going to the basket or hurt you taking up and hitting a little 12-foot jumper. So it's the right game plan to have if you're Illinois. I think it gives you the best chance. I'm just not sure that it's going to work because, again, like it all goes back to the same place. UConn is just too good. For every single chess move you have, they seem to be a couple of moves ahead of you.
I think I found a box score as you were going on there, and if let's say UConn is off from three, maybe a little bit off in the mid range. I remember and looking at this from 2018 when Villanova knocked off Texas Tech in the Elite Eight. That was one of my favorite college basketball teams with Keenan Evans. The year before they made it to the national championship game. And I think Texas Tech was around like a 2-possession underdog. Villanova wins the game by 12. They're, 4 of 24 from three, and they out-rebound Texas Tech by 18, 51 to 33. So to your point, even if UConn has an off game, kind of comparison-wise, though, I do think this may be UConn's toughest matchup in the tournament just because of how explosive Illinois can be in transition if UConn's half-court offense is a little bit subpar, maybe to what we saw in the second half yesterday against San Diego State, which may in turn make this point spread a little bit inflated. But still, even if they do have your quote-unquote off night, maybe like a C- game offensively, they had a C- game in the first half against San Diego State just at the defensive end of the floor, UConn still may cover this point spread, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we are right now is maybe not against Purdue, maybe not against Houston, but against Illinois, who I'm not taking anything away from. They've been a fantastic team. They're riding a wave this month. They've been terrific since the postseason play started. But I still think we're at a point where UConn's B- game beats most teams' A game and beats them probably by like 6 to 10 points. Like it's where we are. I mean, this has been a consistent thing this entire season. Teams have ebbed and flowed. Illinois has looked like a world beater one week, and they've looked like what was that a couple of other times. UConn hasn't done that this entire season. Every loss they've had, I think, has been understandable. More times than not, when they've played spotlight games, they've answered that bell and they've won handily. And then you look at, I think now, like, I fully believe in like March DNA and momentum and stuff at this point in the season. And I think you've got, while it's not the entirely same team that they had a year ago, you've got enough carryover from that squad, and you've got that belief from Danny Hurley that, like, we steamroll teams during this time of the year. Like, we did it all. We had a historically dominant run last season. We're halfway to a historically dominant run this season. And I think once you get that in your head, it does allow you to play a little bit more loose and you play more free, just feeling like no matter what we do, as long as we handle our side, we're going to win, and we're going to win handily. And I think that's what they're bringing into tomorrow's game against Illinois. And at the end of the day, like, I'm with you. Like, I think Illinois can shock the system a little bit. I think that they can do some things to put UConn on their heels at times. But like we've seen them on their heels a couple of times this season. They don't buckle. Like they don't waver. Like they always seem to have this overwhelming faith in what they do, and it's well placed faith. It's understandable faith. So I keep looking at this. I think Illinois, I won't be shocked if they get out to a nice start, get a couple of transition buckets, maybe take a lead midway through the first half or deep into the first half. Ultimately, I think that UConn's just going to keep coming, and their consistency is going to be what wins out in this game. They're just better.
Right. Yeah, my numbers make this right around, like I had on UConn -6, but I don't think I could advocate to really bet either side. I wouldn't be surprised if this one lands 7 or 8. Illinois covers. Still, UConn could very well win this game by double digits if they control the tempo like we touched on off the top. So, Mike, really quickly, any last closing betting thoughts from you on this one, whether it's side or total?
UConn. I mean, I keep saying, we talked about it on my radio show here yesterday, and people were like, I like SDSU for this reason. And I was like, it's UConn. Like, it's the one bet that stood out to me yesterday where I'm like 11.5 or whatever it wound up going off at is just not enough. If this does land at 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, wherever, I think UConn's going to wind up winning. I'm not guaranteeing double digits, but I just think at this point, if you look at everything that we've seen in this tournament, I know Illinois has been great, but you'd be foolish not to. UConn, maybe it is a close game. Maybe they do get beat. Maybe it's a 3-point win. I'm going to have to believe it. I'm going to have to see it to believe it, because it has not happened yet. They've done whatever they've wanted against everybody they've played.
To Mike's point, or a little bit ago, maybe you will be able to get a good live number on UConn if Illinois does jump out to first half lead. So that's worth considering as well. Now on to the second Elite Eight game on Saturday, second of two. Number 4 seed Alabama, about a 3.5 point favorite, depending on the book, against 6 seeded Clemson, total of 155. I have Clemson Final Four futures, 28-1 tickets. So interesting game for me to handicap. My raw numbers actually make this game, I think it's a little bit inflated. I have it Alabama -1, right around Alabama -1. Haslametrics, our partner, closer to Alabama -1.5, but still sizable edge, 1.5, 2-point edge, which is what you look for in the betting market when it comes to college basketball spreads. And the first time either of these teams will head to the Final Four, rematch of what we saw in non-conference play when Clemson won by 8 in Tuscaloosa. Keep in mind, Jack Clark, who is Clemson's Swiss Army knife, wasn't fully healthy in that game. I think only played 12 minutes. It really wasn't fully healthy until Clemson shocked UNC after the Tar Heels beat Duke in early February. But some notes for me here, and then I'll swing it to you, Mike. So Clemson's opponents, like we said, Caleb Love was terrible from 3. Arizona was terrible from 3. And so have pretty much all of Clemson's opponents. Granted, New Mexico isn't very efficient from deep in general. Their first round matchup, as you hit on. Their opponents have shot 18.7% from behind the arc. Clemson shooting 33.3% from deep. Now, you may say, okay, regression is going to come, negative regression is going to come, water is going to meet its level. But I have some historical examples that kind of show that sometimes positive variance just happens, especially when a team is starting to peak. You go back to 2022. UNC, before they lost to Kansas in the title game, so their first 5 NCAA tournament opponents, shot 29.3% from 3. UNC shot 36% from deep. In UCLA's Final Four run the year before that, opponents shot 26.9% from 3. And they shot 31.1% from 3. And with Alabama this year, their opponents have shot 28.2% from deep, while the Tide are shooting 40% from 3. And keep in mind, that's including a terrible or 25%-ish clip against Grand Canyon in the second round. And the Lopes were also off from 3 and off from the free throw line, for that matter, in that second round matchup where Alabama won outright and covered. So I have my notes on the individual matchup, but just, Mike, for anybody saying, okay, Clemson's going to get trucked in this game because negative variance is coming for them. Sometimes positive variance can carry over game by game. Like, you go back to conference play for Clemson, they shot 29% from 3, and their opponent shot 37%-ish from 3 from early January to late February, when they were still kind of getting adjusted when Clark wasn't healthy. So I think this team is really starting to peak at the right time, is my point.
I do too. I think Clemson's absolutely a live shot in this game. These are two teams that, they kind of all season long, the metrics have liked them more than the human eye test has. You look at it and you're like, why is Clemson, 23rd on some of these advanced metrics lists? Like, why is Alabama still in the top 10 when they're only 16-8 or whatever their record was at various times? And a lot of times we wind up seeing those metrics looking pretty smart once March rolls around. These are two teams that fit that mold for sure. I like Clemson because I think that they've been more consistent as the season's played out, and I think that your shooting variance numbers are they definitely come into play here. I think that Alabama is due for more of a regression in a game like this than Clemson is. I just think that Bama, when you look at, like, I hate to say it, like, they're due for a clunker, and I also like this is not based on any sort of statistic or whatever. When you watch them last night, this is just one of those like March things. You kind of got the sense that they felt like they punched their ticket to the Final Four when they beat North Carolina. And that's always a little bit of a, for me, when I see teams like this that have been up and down throughout a season and they get that big win. Because we know that Bama at their best can play with anybody. That's never been their thing. All season long, we've said, if Bama can just play okay defensively and they play their A game on offense, they were like that Kentucky team in the same conference where they can play with anybody, but they can also lose to anybody. And last night we saw them get up, beat the number 1 seed in what was a super emotional game, gigantic output. And when I saw the way that they were celebrating, I was kind of like, they sort of look like they feel like their mission's accomplished. And I'm sure that they know, they went into that game last night knowing that Clemson had already won. Arizona was out, the 2 seed was out. And so, maybe they're kids. Maybe there's a little bit in their brain there where they're thinking, all right, like, we're excited for the Final Four. Let's take our shot at whoever's coming in the semifinal. And Clemson winds up and takes it to them. One of the crazy trends that I love in March is every Final Four since 2012 that we've seen has had at least one team seeded 5th or worse. And I think all of them but one have had a team seeded 7th or worse. The only other team that can continue that trend is NC State over there on the other side of the bracket. So Clemson, recent history says we're going to get one of those teams that's just like, where did they come from? Nobody ever saw this coming. And I kind of feel like Clemson has become this team, and as that tournament goes on, I think that PJ Hall built for this type of moment. I think he'll be rock solid inside. He's, if the officials let him get away with all those elbows and all that stuff, then he's going to get in the minds of the Alabama team and kind of throw them off their game a little bit. Chase Hunter, I think he's been their best player this season. He definitely has that March kind of moment feel to him. I think he can step up to the challenge. I think he'll also embrace the style that Alabama wants to play in. I really like Clemson in this game. I may wind up regretting it. I feel like it's a game that Alabama's either going to win by 20 or Clemson's going to win by like 3 or 4.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And you mentioned, so maybe Hunter, like we saw in the first half, I think Clemson's first or one of their first 2 buckets, he drove the ball in transition. So it's not like Clemson won't selectively run like UConn. I'm not saying Clemson is comparable to UConn by any stretch, but generally speaking, they're a slower paced team. And that definitely fits what Clemson wants to do, trying to take away the 3, at least in transition for Alabama, and slow this thing into a rock fight. And Brad Brownell is definitely going to enforce that and try to dictate that pace here. And then you look at PJ Hall against Alabama's front court, especially, even if Pringle plays with that shin, heel, foot injury, whatever it may be, I don't think he's 100%. That's Alabama's best post defender to me. And if you look at the efficiency numbers per synergy, Alabama allowing 0.88 points per possession on opponents' post-up touches, that ranks in the 43rd percentile. And when you look at more of a surface level, traditional numbers, 7.4 post-up points per game allowed. That's 15th highest nationally. So PJ Hall, Ian Shefflin, Gerard and Hall and Shefflin and Hunter, everybody in the mid-range, can take advantage of Alabama in that sense, because Alabama sometimes plays drop coverage. They've switched it up. They've hard hedged at times this season. They've schematically adjusted in second halves, but they do play their fair share of drop. We'll see how Nate Oates decides to play this thing. And then the matchup zone, you mentioned Brownell kind of going with a softer approach, like a softer shell zone defense at times that Clemson did over the first couple games, especially against New Mexico, because they're not an efficient 3-point shooting team. I'm looking at you, Jalen House. That kind of negates Alabama's athleticism, especially if you get those forced threes that we saw Caleb Love take and Pele Larson take at times. Even though Arizona could take threes, see, this is the difference between Arizona and Alabama. Arizona ranks like bottom 60 in 3-point attempt rate. Alabama is obviously a 3-point heavy shooting team, but they're much different in transition, like we saw against UNC last night, than if you get them into the half court and it's late shot clock and they feel like they have to force up a 3. They're much more reliant on the 3, so maybe there's a little bit of regression coming for Clemson's 3-point defense to an extent. But Clemson also, when I mention forcing Alabama into the half court, they're also pretty elite when it comes to their transition defense, and Jack Clark is a big reason why. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to play my Clemson Final Four futures here, if I'm going to hedge you a little bit, but I do feel really good matchup-wise. If Pringle's injury does loom large, which I think it could, whether he starts or comes off the bench, and then also Wrightsell, who knows if he's going to play with that potential concussion.
Yeah, I think it's like you said. It's one of those games, kind of like last night's game against Arizona, where if Alabama's going to come out and they're going to just shoot the lights out, you throw your hands up if you're Clemson and you say, well, yeah, this was our best chance to win this game. This was statistically, this was the way that we had to play this. And if last night, Caleb Love's a guy who's capable of going off for 40 on a given night. He's capable of shooting Arizona out of a game on a given night. And if it had been, the former, where he just was hitting everything, Arizona was moving on and they're playing in the Elite Eight. It wasn't. And so Clemson's here. It's kind of the same thing. If Mark Sears is going to go nuts from the outside, if some of these other guys, Estrada's going to go nuts from the outside, there's only so much you can do. I look at the first matchup, and I do think, how much we can take away from that, you can debate that. But PJ Hall, to your point, was really, really good in that game, really effective at getting it inside. I think he scored 21 points. The one guy that I will circle who I feel like has kind of been poised for, we haven't heard from him that much in this tournament, is Joe Girard for Clemson. He's a 25-point game waiting to happen if you give him a ton of outside shots. He had 7 threes, took 7 threes in the first game against Bama and made 4 of them. Bama's going to let him get shots, and he's a big game waiting to happen. It's going to happen at some point if Clemson makes this run to the Final Four. And I kind of circled this one and think Bama will let him get his looks, I think. And he's a guy who loves, very streaky shooter. When he hits a couple, he's going to get it going. He's going to start talking some, bleep. He's going to start. He's going to start feeling it a little bit. And I can see him getting it going in this game, especially if Chase Hunter maybe is a little bit off and needs somebody to defer to. Like I said, I keep, it goes back to if Bama is just making a crazy amount of threes, which is certainly possible. There's only so much you can do with the personnel that you have at Clemson. But if they're not, which I think is the more likely output here, I really like Clemson to do what they need to do in half-court situations and just kind of be rock solid on the other end of the floor to win this game. I think that they're very live shot.
Yeah, defensively too, Clemson ranks top 60 in defensive rebounding percentage. Now, I will say, going back to that first meeting, Alabama 15 offensive rebounds and 16 last night. So that's an area where I didn't think Alabama was going to be able to exploit UNC in terms of generating that many second chance opportunities. So maybe that negates Clemson's upper echelon defensive rebounding percentage to an extent. Hall and Shefflin, though, you would expect Clemson to play towards the defensive glass, get back in transition. They're not really an offensive rebounding team in general in terms of creating second chance opportunities themselves. So I wouldn't really expect that to change, especially with how much Brownell is going to enforce. We need to keep Alabama in the half court, right?
Right. I mean, I think that both teams are going to do what they've done consistently in this tournament, what they've done all season long. It's just going to be a matter of which team can do what they do well, the best on this particular night. So, Brad Brownell, he hasn't been here before. This is the first time Clemson's been to an Elite Eight since 1980. But my God, the guy's been coaching in this program for what feels like 35 years, which is like 70 years in this day and age. So, I don't think the moment's going to be too big for him. Last night, it certainly was not too big for him in the Sweet 16. Nate Oates, we'll see. I think that especially young guys, when they start to get this reputation of, they can't win when it's the biggest, which is a little bit kind of attached to him. I don't know if he panics a little bit or if he's not ready for the big time moment, but it's going to be a fascinating matchup. I think either side, you've got the weird dichotomy of a fan base that it just kind of casually pays attention to basketball. I think Bama's gotten into it a little bit more in recent years. They've had some really, really good home crowds. Clemson still is just kind of this is a fun little thing to do before we get ready for spring practice. But these two programs, they've plugged away. They've gotten to this point. They've put a lot into their basketball programs in recent years, and it's cool to see them have this moment in March. It's nice that Alabama and Clemson get to finally have something go their way for a change in college athletics, right?
Exactly. My biggest question for you, though, Mike, are you going to be ordering the chef hat like we've seen Clemson student section rock over the last 3 games for free in Shefflin?
No, but I love it. I do love it. I might Ian Shefflin, who looks like a kind of a larger Jack White. He's become one of the stars of their March run, but he's a fun guy to watch and an easy guy to root for. And I do love the chef hats.
If Clemson cashes my Final Four ticket, whether I hedge a little bit or not, I'm definitely going to be playing Seven Nation Army. If you're going to make that Ian Shefflin, Jack White comparison, I'll be blasting some Jack White for sure. But he is Mike Rutherford. You can follow him on X at Card Chronicle, manager of cardchronicle.com, also host of the Mike Rutherford Show and author of 100 Things Louisville Fans Should Know and Do. Really quickly before we get out of here, Mike, Pat Kelsey going to Louisville. When we think about teams, and you asked me on X last night what I thought about the hire. If he gets his guys in place, he plays the style at both ends of the floor to create havoc in March. 3-point heavy shooting team and trying to generate turnovers, so create extra possessions. What do you make of the hire, and how quickly do you think Louisville can potentially turn this thing around?
It's a weird situation down here because Pat Kelsey was I think everyone knows, was not Louisville's first choice, was not Louisville's second choice, was not Louisville's third choice. And he made a funny comment. He was very self-deprecating at his introductory press conference. He made light of the fact that he was clearly not U of L's first choice. But I think the fan base now is kind of sold itself on, hey, we may have lucked into the right guy at the right situation, at the right time. Louisville fans, they are as passionate as they are in the country. And I think over the last couple of years, they've been so frustrated by what feels like sort of like a lack of effort, a lack of energy amongst the coaching staff. You're sitting there watching these games and you're like, is anyone going to say anything? We're down by 18 to Boston College. Maybe call a timeout. And like the coaching staff seems like they're asleep. It's like, somebody do something for the love of God. And, Pat Kelsey is energy, bouncing off the walls, going nuts. And I think that really resonated with the fan base. And so you went from you had this 24-hour progression where I think the fan base was like, this sucks. Like who is this guy? This is not who we wanted. I don't know if this is going to work, to, finding some videos of him, reading about his system, reading about what he did at Winthrop in Charleston, and then seeing him interact with the fans yesterday when he was introduced. And now people are like, I don't think anybody's like, we're back, but people are very cautiously optimistic and thinking like, hey, this could work. Like you said, if he can get his guys in there, if he can get the right injection of talent, and if his system can translate to this level with a more athletic, more talented breed of player, I think then Louisville fans can be excited. I mean, at this point, we just want to be normal. Like we're not desperate to be back in the Final Four. We just want to be better than winning 4 and 8 games in 2 years. We'll settle for that. That will be a nice first step if it happens.
And one last point to put the cherry on top of this conversation. I'm sure Louisville fans are upset about not getting Dusty May, but you want to talk about variance in March? They probably should have lost to Memphis in the first round last year. Who knows if everybody's giving Dusty May his flowers? I'm not rooting against the guy to fail at Michigan, but who knows what's going to happen there? Yeah,
it's one of the talking points that Louisville fans, we talked about on my radio show, when it looked like we were going to hire Dusty May. It was one of the, if you're weighing the pros and the cons, that was one of the cons. Is like, if Memphis plays a normal minute of basketball, or if there isn't a horrible jump ball call in the last minute, are we even talking about this guy as a potential candidate? But that's March. Like, there's such a thin line between March glory and March failure. And we were talking on the show yesterday too about Pat Kelsey. They were down in the last minute of their Coastal Association semifinal game against Towson, the 7th seed in that league. It took a miracle comeback and Towson making some errors for them to even make their conference tournament championship game. If they lose that game, I don't know if you're hiring Pat Kelsey. So, there's always a thin line there. There's definitely a butterfly effect going on there. But, Dusty, like all these guys, especially in this day and age, when you talk about making the jump from the mid-major ranks to the power conference ranks, it's a gigantic guess because nobody knows how well these guys are going to utilize NIL and the portal and how well they're going to be able to take all these different players and form them into a cohesive unit. So it's more of a guessing game now than it's ever been. Dusty may be fantastic at Michigan. Josh Schertz, if he winds up going to St. Louis, may be fantastic there. All these guys might end up sucking. We just don't know.
Right there with you, man. And if you're looking to bet $5 on Louisville's national championship odds next year, you can get $150 in bonus bets. Even if it loses, you'll get those $150 in bonus bets from BetMGM Sportsbook using promo code The Lines, one word. Remember that terms and conditions apply. You can find all of our bets in real time in the Lines Discord channel. Link is over at thelines.com in the top right-hand corner. It's free. Participate in our March Madness contest. We are giving away hundreds and hundreds of dollars. That's not an exaggeration by any stretch. So be sure to sign up for those contests in March for Elite Eight, Final Four, whatever it may be, over at play.thelines.com. Mike, really appreciate the time today, man.
Of course, man. Happy to do it. Happy March.
He is Card Chronicle on X. You can follow him there. I'm at Eli Erskovich. Thanks for watching and listening to another edition of Outside Shots, this preview of the Saturday edition of Elite Eight action. So long, everybody, and good luck on your bets.